Hong Kong is a city built in layers, vertical, luminous, and impossibly dense. But beneath the skyline is a quieter architecture. Mountains that rise straight from the sea, temples tucked between towers, markets that move like living organisms, and vantage points where the entire city feels suspended between land and sky. This list explores 10 places where Hong Kong reveals its most surprising contrasts. Moments where nature, infrastructure, and human rhythm collide in ways that feel almost unreal. Lion Rock. Lion Rock rises above Kowloon with a presence that feels both geological and symbolic, a ridge that seems to watch over the city rather than simply sit beside it. The ascent begins in shaded forest, where bamboo leans over narrow paths and the air carries a faint coolness absent at street level. As the trail climbs, the city's noise dissolves into a low vibration, replaced by wind moving through leaves and the occasional call of birds hidden in the canopy. The shift is gradual, creating the sense of stepping out of Hong Kong's density without ever leaving its boundaries. Higher up, the trees thin and the first stone outcrops appear, revealing glimpses of the skyline through gaps in the foliage. Each turn widens the view until the forest gives way to open rock, and the entire city unfolds at once. From this height, the urban grid compresses into patterns of glass, concrete, and shadow, framed by the harbor on one side and mountains on the other. The scale becomes abstract, almost like a model, yet the city's energy remains visible in the movement of ferries, the shifting light on towers, and the layering of haze and sun. Locals often describe Lion Rock as a place tied to the city's character. The ridge has long been associated with endurance, shaped by the idea that Hong Kong's identity is anchored as much in its surrounding mountains as in its architecture. Reaching the summit makes that relationship clear. Forested slopes sit directly behind you, while one of the world's most vertical urban landscapes stretches outward in front. The ridge doesn't separate these environments so much as hold them in tension, offering a vantage point where the city's intensity and the mountain's stillness feel equally present. Lian Nunnery and Lian Garden. Lian Nunnery and the adjoining Lian Garden sit in the middle of Kowloon with a quietness that feels almost improbable. Stepping through the entrance shifts the atmosphere immediately. The city's density softens, traffic noise fades, and the air takes on the scent of wood, stone, and water. The transition feels intentional, as though the space is designed to slow the senses before anything else. Timber halls built in the style of the Tang Dynasty rise around a central courtyard, their proportions creating a steady rhythm that encourages a slower pace. The architecture relies on interlocking wooden joints rather than nails, a method that gives the structures a grounded, almost breathing presence. Pools of still water mirror the dark roofs and surrounding hills, creating reflections that seem deeper than the ponds themselves. Sound behaves differently here. Footsteps settle softly on stone, and the movement of koi beneath the surface adds a faint, shifting texture to the quiet. Beyond the main halls, the garden extends this atmosphere through curved paths that frame rocks, trees, and ponds with deliberate precision. Outside the walls, Kowloon moves with its usual intensity. Buses, markets, neon, and high-rise apartments pressed tightly together. Inside, the pace changes in a way that feels less like escape and more like recalibration. The design encourages attention to small details: the grain of a wooden beam, the weight of a carved roof tile, the way sunlight settles on the surface of a pond. Lian and Lian offer a view of Hong Kong that rarely appears in the city's faster spaces, showing how calm can be built into the urban fabric rather than found apart from it. The garden and nunnery work together as a reminder that stillness can be engineered with the same care as movement. Tai O Fishing Village. Tai O sits on the western edge of Lantau Island, far enough from the city's center that the pace shifts the moment you arrive. The village stretches along a tidal inlet where stilt houses rise above the water in a way that feels both fragile and enduring. Wooden walkways link clusters of homes, and the soundscape is shaped by the tide, the creak of timber, and the low hum of boats moving through narrow channels. The atmosphere carries a sense of continuity, as though the village has been breathing at the same rhythm for generations. The built environment reveals a form of adaptation rarely seen in rapidly modernized cities. Stilt houses respond directly to the shifting waterline, creating a visual texture distinct from Hong Kong's vertical skyline. These details point to a community shaped by tides rather than timetables, with daily life arranged around the movement of water. Along the main paths, markets offer dried seafood, handmade snacks, and ingredients tied to the village's fishing heritage. The air carries a mix of salt, smoke, and the faint sweetness of pastries cooling on racks. Even with visitors passing through, the village maintains a rhythm that feels internally set. People move with an ease that contrasts sharply with the urgency of the city across the water, giving the place a self-contained character. Tai O's significance comes from the way it preserves a working relationship with its environment. The village adapts to modern pressures without abandoning the logic of its original design, showing a version of Hong Kong where change happens gradually and in response to the tide. In a city known for rapid reinvention, this slower, water-bound rhythm offers a different understanding of continuity. Victoria Peak. Victoria Peak is one of the most photographed places in Hong Kong, but dawn alters its atmosphere in a way that feels almost private. Before the first tram arrives and long before the viewing platforms fill, the mountain seems to hover slightly apart from the city below. Cool air settles on railings and stone paths, and the skyline appears in softened outlines rather than sharp silhouettes. Early light moves slowly across the landscape, revealing a version of Hong Kong that exists only for a brief stretch each morning. At this hour, the circular paths around the peak take on a suspended quality. Buildings emerge gradually from the haze, their reflections stretching across the harbor in faint, elongated shapes. Even the soundscape shifts. Wind moves through the trees, leaves rustle in uneven patterns, and the distant hum of ventilation systems signals the city preparing to wake. The scene feels held in a moment before acceleration. As the sun climbs, the landscape changes again. Light catches the tops of towers first, turning glass surfaces into narrow bands of gold. The mountain's stillness remains constant, while the city below begins to gather momentum, creating a layered sense of motion and calm. From this height, Hong Kong's vertical form reads differently, less like a collection of towers and more like a terrain shaped by necessity. Dawn on the peak offers a vantage point, where the city's intensity becomes easier to understand. The elevation creates enough distance to see movement forming without being inside it, allowing the morning to unfold in slow, deliberate stages. In a place known for speed, this early light introduces a quieter rhythm that rarely appears during the rest of the day. Choi Hung Estate. Choi Hung Estate is one of Hong Kong's oldest public housing complexes, yet its impact comes from something far simpler than age. Long facades painted in gradients of blue, green, yellow, and red stretch across the blocks, colors chosen decades ago to brighten daily life. Sunlight has softened them over time, turning the palette into a warm pastel wash that feels lived in rather than curated. The effect is subtle but unmistakable, giving the estate a visual identity that has grown naturally from its surroundings. In the courtyards, the estate's daily rhythm becomes clearer. Residents move between shops, schools, and basketball courts with a pace shaped by routine. Laundry hangs from balconies in tall, vertical lines, adding a shifting layer of texture over the painted walls. Conversations drift across open spaces, radios play from windows, and the bounce of a basketball echoes between towers. Fame hasn't altered the estate's function. It remains a working community where the visual iconography is simply part of everyday life. Above the courtyards, the rooftop basketball court offers a perspective that has become emblematic of Choi Hung. The open platform frames the surrounding towers in a way that feels almost cinematic, turning a simple recreational space into a vantage point that captures the geometry of Hong Kong's architecture. Choi Hung's significance comes from how naturally its identity formed. The colors, the scale, and the lived-in details create a portrait of Hong Kong where community life and visual culture overlap without intention. In a city defined by rapid transformation, the estate shows how meaning can accumulate slowly through use, routine, and the texture of ordinary living. Sai Wan Swimming Shed. Sai Wan Swimming Shed sits on the western edge of Hong Kong Island, where the shoreline narrows into a meeting point between concrete and open sea. The structure itself is modest, a wooden walkway extending from the rocks into deeper water, yet the surroundings feel far larger than the scale suggests. Waves strike the metal railings with a steady rhythm, sending spray into the air and leaving a thin layer of salt on the boards. Originally built to give swimmers direct access to the ocean, the shed has gradually become a place where the city's connection to the sea feels unusually direct. Reaching the walkway involves descending a series of steps carved into the hillside. With each level, more of the horizon appears, and the background noise of the city thins out. The water moves with a restless consistency, rising and falling against the rocks in patterns that shift from moment to moment. The walkway sways slightly with each wave, making it clear that this is a structure built to meet the ocean rather than resist it. Although the shed is often photographed at sunset, its quieter hours reveal more of its character. By evening, stronger winds push the tide higher, sending spray over the railings and darkening the color of the sea. Throughout the day, the shed offers a perspective that is rare in Hong Kong, a place where the ocean occupies the foreground and the city becomes a distant backdrop. The openness of the water creates a horizontal space that contrasts with the city's vertical intensity, giving the shoreline a distinct and steady presence. Manmo Temple. Manmo Temple sits along Hollywood Road in a way that almost disguises its age. The exterior blends into the surrounding neighborhood, but crossing the threshold changes the atmosphere immediately. Warm, incense-laden air settles around you, thick with decades of accumulated smoke. Coils of incense hang overhead in slow spirals, each releasing a thin thread that rises toward the rafters. Lanterns cast a muted glow through the haze, shaping a space where light feels softened and time seems to move differently. The temple honors two deities, Man associated with literature and Mo linked to martial strength, a pairing that reflects a long-standing cultural balance. Wooden altars line the interior, carved with intricate patterns that catch the light in narrow highlights. Offerings of fruit, flowers, and incense sticks sit neatly arranged, each placed with quiet intention. Visitors adjust their pace almost unconsciously, moving in step with the room's subdued rhythm. Inside, the sensory density builds gradually. Footsteps soften against the stone floor, and the faint crackle of burning incense blends into the background. Smoke drifts upward in overlapping currents, creating shifting layers that alter how objects appear from one moment to the next. Even the temperature feels distinct, warmed by the constant presence of flame and the enclosed stillness of the hall. Rather than presenting itself as a preserved relic, the temple functions as a living space shaped by continuous use. Rituals, offerings, and daily movement give the interior a steady pulse that contrasts with the city's constant negotiation of space outside. Within these walls, history is not displayed but enacted, woven into the architecture and atmosphere in a way that makes the past feel active rather than distant. Yick Monster Building. Yick, often called the Monster Building, is one of the clearest expressions of Hong Kong's vertical density. The complex is a cluster of interconnected residential blocks arranged around a narrow central courtyard, creating a space where thousands of windows face inward toward a single open void. From ground level, the walls rise in steep, uninterrupted layers of concrete, metal railings, and air conditioning units. The scale feels overwhelming not because of height alone, but because of how tightly every element occupies its place. Stepping into the courtyard changes the atmosphere immediately. Sunlight reaches the ground only in thin intervals, filtered through balconies and laundry lines that stretch across the upper floors. The air carries a mix of cooking aromas, detergent, and the faint metallic warmth of aging infrastructure. Residents move with practiced ease, navigating stairwells, small shops, and corridors that weave through the lower levels. The building operates as a compact ecosystem shaped by daily routines and long-established habits. Up close, the structure reveals a logic that isn't apparent from the street. Balconies, windows, and external pipes show layers of adaptation. Makeshift shelving, repurposed containers, filled with plants and belongings arranged to use every available inch. What might seem chaotic from afar becomes a pattern of lived-in order, shaped by necessity and the constraints of limited space. The courtyard offers a vantage point that compresses Hong Kong's density into a single frame. Looking upward, the walls appear to converge toward a narrow rectangle of sky, emphasizing how little horizontal room the city has to expand. Yick doesn't present an idealized version of urban life. Instead, it shows how architecture and daily living intertwine in a place where space is constantly negotiated and continuously used. Dragon's Back. Dragon's Back is one of the few places in Hong Kong where the city's density falls away almost immediately. The trail begins in a shaded corridor of trees, but the landscape opens quickly into a long, undulating ridge that feels suspended between ocean and sky. From the first rise, the South China Sea stretches outward in a wide arc, and the islands scattered along the horizon appear as quiet silhouettes. Instead of towers, the view shifts to rolling hills, open water, and clouds drifting slowly across the coastline. Once on the ridge, the environment takes over the rhythm of movement. Wind pushes across the trail with enough force to alter your balance, carrying the scent of salt and vegetation in alternating waves. The path rises and dips in smooth curves, giving the sense of following the spine of the landscape. Even on busy days, the openness creates a spaciousness that feels rare in Hong Kong. Looking toward Tai O Village adds another dimension to the view. Houses cluster along the shoreline in soft colors, and the beach forms a pale crescent against darker rock. From above, the village appears shaped by the coastline rather than by any urban grid. Paragliders often drift overhead, their slow arcs emphasizing the scale of the surrounding terrain. The ridge offers a perspective defined by horizon rather than height. It shows how quickly Hong Kong transitions from dense streets to expansive coastline, revealing a landscape where wilderness sits just beyond the city's edge. The experience feels anchored not in vertical intensity, but in the broad, steady openness of sea and sky, a horizontal calm that reshapes how the region is understood. Temple Street Night Market. Temple Street Night Market comes alive at an hour when much of the city is winding down, creating a rhythm that belongs entirely to the evening. The market stretches through Yau Ma Tei in a long corridor of light, sound, and movement, framed by neon signs that glow against the darkening sky. As stalls open, the street shifts from an ordinary roadway into a dense network of vendors, arranging their goods with practiced efficiency. As the night deepens, the sensory layers build. The scent of stir-fried noodles and grilled seafood drifts from food stalls, mixing with incense from nearby temples and the faint smell of engine oil from passing taxis. Voices overlap in multiple languages as vendors call out prices, negotiate with customers, and greet familiar faces. The soundscape moves in waves, never still but rarely overwhelming, shaped by the flow of people moving through the narrow lanes. Objects on display range from practical to ornamental. Watches, clothing, electronics, herbal remedies, and small trinkets arranged in tight rows. Each stall forms its own microenvironment, illuminated by hanging bulbs that cast warm light onto metal surfaces and plastic tarps. The visual density mirrors the city's architecture, but the scale remains human, shaped by hands rather than machinery. Temple Street captures a form of urban energy that doesn't rely on height or speed. The market's intensity comes from proximity, from the closeness of people, objects, and movement, compressed into a single stretch of street. In the glow of the lights, the neighborhood takes on a character that belongs to the night itself, offering a view of Hong Kong built from ground-level motion rather than skyline silhouettes. Hong Kong is often described through its speed, its density, and its skyline, but its most striking places reveal something quieter. A city shaped by contrasts, where mountains meet neon and centuries-old rituals coexist with glass towers. These 10 locations show how Hong Kong holds its complexity, not by choosing between nature and infrastructure, but by letting both exist at full intensity. In a place built on edges, the most surprising moments are the ones where everything feels briefly in balance.